Hello and welcome back to the Patient First podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Bryan Laskin, and as always, I'm glad that you're here. And we have a great guest today. I am so excited to talk to Amy Wood. Amy and I really just met. We had one video conference call, and then I was like, we have to get you on the podcast because just what a fresh perspective to one of the most, sorry, Amy, boring things that I'm really excited about too. Right. Amy's goal is to protect people, which is not boring. That's not the boring part. After her information was compromised in a data breach, she made it her mission to ensure that it doesn't happen to anyone else. She spent the last decade as a HIPAA educator. That's the boring part, I also am a HIPAA educator in some degree, risk assessor and data breach consultant, and is passionate about educating as many people as she can to ensure the safety and privacy of protected health information. Very important topic. Amy, thanks so much for being on the podcast.
I'm so happy to be here.
Well, you have a story that's written to talk about privacy and security of data. So I think it would probably be worthwhile for you to tell our audience kind of how you got into this. Like you allude to it in your bio, but it's a hell of a story.
I wish I could make it up. I'm not that creative. So what ended up happening was I was running a IT company for small healthcare in Northern California with my husband. I don't recommend working with your spouse for that long. It was not fun. And we had 2 kids under 2, and I decided to throw in upper and lower orthodontic surgery at the same time. Rejected my titanium a couple days after the surgery, had my screws come loose and had to have it all taken out. And I thought we were okay after that. But then a year later, I got a letter in the mail saying that my x-rays from that surgery during that time frame ended up for sale on the dark web. And at the time, they were putting my name, birth date, social security number, and insurance medical record number on those images in plain text. And so all of that information was for sale on the dark web as well. Come to find out after much more investigation that it was the person working at the imaging center that had made an unauthorized copy of these x-rays and put them onto a thumb drive. And her boyfriend thought it was a great idea to get into identity theft and uploaded them onto the dark web. And because of what I do now with data breaches and working with government agencies, I know that I've been sold about 60,000 times. And I've dealt with financial identity theft. I've dealt with impersonation. I even had medical impersonation to try to get surgery, which actually did affect me personally. I was not able to get my blood pressure medication because of that impersonation. And I'm German and Irish. We come out of the womb with high blood pressure. So I really, really needed that. It's just, it's never ending and it doesn't go away. So it really just kind of lit this fire in me where I realized that dental is such an underserved market on this and we can do better. The patients deserve better.
Now, I want to highlight and look up one term that you said, that dentistry is underserved. I would argue, having talked to dentists about HIPAA and security and privacy of data, HIPAA, I think the P, everybody forgets the P in HIPAA, which is portability, right? Which is the problem that we're trying to solve with tooth apps, giving patients access to their data, giving dentists access to the data that they're stewards of. And as stewards of the data, dentists are responsible for the privacy and security, which is why, and portability, frankly, of this data. Well, that piece is yet to be addressed at all in the profession. But privacy and security people talk about. I would argue that the the measures are there for the most part. However, dentists just aren't taking action about it. A, do you agree with that? And B, why? Like
100%
questions.
agree with it. 100% agree with that. And I think it really goes back to 20, 30 years ago when HIPAA first came out. It was yet another stupid regulation and it was boring and most of it applied to hospitals and it was just privacy and paperwork. And it was very similar to OSHA in that if you just checked the boxes and had the right paperwork and did the training every year, that was all you had to do. And that was fine up until we started adding digital x-ray sensors and computers in the ops. And we started having all these integrations into the practice management system. and all this technology and all these companies that have new technology, and not all of it is very secure. So I kind of look at it as standard of care. And standard of care in healthcare for treating patients moves at a pretty slow pace. Yeah, I remember when I first started working as a 16-year-old, it was called CPR. Now it's called basic life support, and it's more about perfusion instead of breaths. That standard of care has changed, but that took 40 years to change. And when we're talking about technology and especially security and cybersecurity, that moves at almost a daily pace. And if you don't know what you're talking about with that, or you don't know how to understand that information, it's really difficult for doctors to make an effective plan to protect themselves and their data.
So one of my New Year's resolutions is to really look for areas where I disagree with with the people that I'm talking to on this
Okay.
podcast, because I think it makes more interesting. And not that I disagree with you, but there's one part of what you said that I would like to discuss. The fact that it's HIPAA, like privacy and security of data, is becoming a bigger challenge now because of how the data is stored in dental practices. I would argue that it was a massive problem with paper charts. We just didn't, but if the information couldn't be sold on the dark web. So I think the where I think the real barrier, the real problem is the ability to monetize this on the bad actors' parts. Because, for example, in your case, this was a flash drive, right? This wasn't a cloud-based thing, which people think of the cloud as being the weak point. You can actually have very robust security in this cloud, or it can be garbage, much like you can leave the office door front open. And frankly, many systems in dentistry have the front door open to to your software, right? So that's garbage and has to be stopped. However, some offices were leaving the front door open with all the files just laying around the practice too, right? But I feel like the reason why, because the criminals have gotten more sophisticated in monetizing this, whether it's a paper chart, flash drive, server, or in the cloud. Once they get their hands on this data, then I think I do agree with you though when it comes to integrations, because integrations can mean many things. And there are so many companies in this industry who are getting their data by companies that are building their own roads or hacking into to your data and reselling it. And that is, I think, just a blatant violation, and that's a standard practice in this industry. So sorry, I went on a little bit of a diatribe, but I think what I want to address, and you can either confirm or validate what or confirm or discredit what I said. Okay, am I right or am I right? It's because I don't want the dentist to be worried that if they're keeping their patients' data in an electronic format, they verified that the companies that they're using are are getting the information. Like if you're using a reminder platform, that they're going through the authorized API, not some third party that's hacking into the system, stuff like that. That if they're going through the right channels, which is hard in dentistry because there's a lot of garbage going on, but if they verify that that the companies they're working with are HIPAA compliant, that that's not going to really increase the problem of the risk of data breach. It's just you have to look at it differently. Just like you would have to put a camera in your office, locks on the doors, lights at night. You have to make sure that there's security with electronic data too. Would you agree with that?
I would. I think there's a couple different levels of offices that I'm thinking of. You've got the people that are just starting out and they're just trying to check a box and do their class every year and move on. And then there's some that they are attempting to do more and they think they're hiring a really good IT provider, or they've got all these companies that have sold them on the fact that they are secure without actually properly vetting them. And then you've got offices like the ones you and I really hope everyone is, but sadly they're not, that actually have their act together and they're asking the vendors the difficult questions, or they have hired someone like me to ask those questions on their behalf. And I can tell you in the early days, I had some big vendors that were threatening to sue me just for simply asking basic security and compliance questions on behalf of these doctors, which has been required since
Well,
1996.
yeah. I mean, I said so. Let's address that because I mean, one of the reasons why I'm just so thrilled with what you're doing is that it's sorely needed. I mean, as a dentist, as if you're an office manager, even if you're running a DSO, it's it. You know, I see compliance officers within DSOs who are afraid to say anything because they're going to be, you know, if you raise your hand and say, "Hey, our security sucks," like nobody wants to hear that,
No, that's
right?
their job on the
Yeah.
line. And I'm not afraid to be the bad guy. I'm a great scapegoat for when office managers want to say, well, Amy said we have to do this. So this is what we're doing now. And Amy's a nice person, but we don't want to tick her off. And then I've been called a sun hater. I've been called the Grim Reaper. I've been called all kinds of things over the years. But at the end of the day, you can be mad at me or you can screw up and cause an issue with your patients. Because I mean, I've been victimized. I know what that feels like over and over and over again. And every time it happens, I think back to that one person that if they had been trained better, if they had better policies and procedures and processes, and if they weren't just checking a box, if they were actually understanding it 10 layers deep like I do, if they understood a why something has to be that way instead of just being told, this is what you do. Nobody's going to do
Well,
that. I mean, like people tell me all the time, oh, you need to diet and exercise. And I'm like, but peanut butter cups sound really awesome right now.
well, you're the bad guy until the real bad guy shows up, right? Because you know, I've been part of a large dental group that got had a cybersecurity event, and I can tell you it derailed them for 18 months. Um, and if they were working with you, that would not have happened, just bluntly, because I know exactly how it went down. Wouldn't have happened, right? And I talked to dental. I don't know of a dental group, frankly, that hasn't been hacked. And if you haven't been, and if you have, guess what? They're probably still in your systems, and they probably can do it again if you don't do the right things. And I went to dinner with a friend of mine who works in a totally different industry. They had to hire some company to get Bitcoin to pay off ransom. I mean, this is going on all over the place, and it's
Should
at an
never happen.
increasing rate.
It should never happen. So, I mean, when I was doing IT, we had, I want to say it was 20, the beginning of 2013. So we decided in IT that we were going full managed services. And what that meant was we were going to have a minimum standard with security in order to keep a client or maintain a client in the IT capacity. And all of our other colleagues in the dental IT space, they thought we were crazy. And I said, look, we got two ransomwares in 1 week. One office, we had just cloud backups that were just archived data only, not programs. And the other, we had what's called a bare metal backup, where we could restore 15-minute old data, not a day or two old data. And it happened pretty quickly. So the one office that had the cloud backups only, they lost 2 days of data and it took them almost a week to get back up because of their internet speed. The other office, they lost 15 minutes of data and they were back up in 4 hours. I mean, the
Wow.
two wildly different situations in the same week. And I remember looking at my husband and I said, this is stupid. And from what you're telling me, this is mostly preventable. So why don't we create systems and plans to make it preventable? And so we did that in 2013. And from that time on, not a single incidence of ransomware or security incidents. And really it's not that hard. You're not going to have the budget of a government agency or a big Fortune 500 company, but really the hackers are going after low-hanging fruit. And so that barrier to entry, just getting above that low-hanging fruit, that's not that hard.
Yeah, and if you're listening to this podcast and you're wondering, are we the low hanging fruit? The answer is yes, because you would know if you're not. That's right.
I've
I
done
mean,
over 500 data breaches in dental. Trust me, you guys are the low-hanging fruit.
yeah,
And I
I
don't
mean,
want that.
it's shocking. It's shocking what I mean, and a lot of times it's not the dentist's fault. It's the software vendor that hasn't changed their software in the last literally 30 years. And by the way, they just I think it was this week or last week that they announced new HIPAA security rules that are going to be finalized been because the HIPAA rules, which the industry is lagging quite far behind on, are already out are quite outdated. And so the security is getting beefed up again, right? Which is a whole, another talk show. But, I think, you, as we were setting up for this podcast, you said that a term that I'd like you to clarify or explain to people listening that dental practices, when they're thinking about privacy and security, should embrace the suck. What do you mean by that?
So the Navy SEALs have a couple of phrases I truly love. The first is embrace the suck, and the other is the only easy day was yesterday. And all of us can agree that the thousands of pages of regulation that make up HIPAA, it truly sucks because it's mostly for hospitals. And dental is often overlooked in that, yet we still have to comply with it. So being able to sift through all that regulation and figure out what's truly reasonable and appropriate for a dental practice to implement instead of what's required versus how can I get away with not doing this. Uh, I just say stop burying your head in the sand, stop trying to avoid it, stop trying to not pay for it. It's actually cheaper and less time consuming to embrace the suck that is HIPAA and just implement it in your practice. It actually helps with a lot of other areas and streamlines things and gets the team on board with everything. And once you have that cohesive team think, where they're all thinking the same thing and they're all behaving the same way. It's kind of that magical secret sauce that these doctors go to classes and hire consultants for, where everyone's working together for the same causes. And those are the offices that I love to see the transformation. And it's so satisfying on my end. And then
Well,
it's less
it's
work for me.
well, it sounds a lot like what dentists talk to their patients about every single day, right? You need to have scaling rip planing. Maybe you need to have orthodontic surgery. Maybe you need to have just orthodontics. Maybe you need to have an implant. But like you've got an issue to address, then we can put the things in place that then we can have preventative maintenance going on, right? Versus having a catastrophic event and needing to do all on six on the upper and lower at some point in time. And I mean, that's really what we're talking about. We're talking about being preventive and relying on the people that know what they're doing to help help avoid catastrophic consequences, which we frankly know are going to happen at some point. We just kind of don't know when, right?
Well, I kind of look at it as, do you want a minor inconvenience or do you want a major emergency? Because if I do my job right, it's a minor inconvenience. It's a couple of minutes, it's a conversation, it's, readjusting what we do versus a major catastrophe that shouldn't happen if you do things correctly. That's catastrophic. That could take down your practice. It could bankrupt you. You could have patient lawsuits. I mean, I've seen it all. I've seen it anywhere from a couple $1,000s in costs all the way up to a couple $100,000 in cost out of pocket for some doctors. And I hate having to be the bad guy in that kind of situation, to just say, this was all preventable and I'm sorry no one told you that.
Yeah, it's like saying, we have to extract all your teeth and do something, dentures or, whatever it is. Nobody really wants to be in that position.
Well, I
Uh,
hope I'm never in that position because
well,
after all I've been through with the
well,
3
it's,
rounds of
that's what the
braces.
dentists are thinking. I don't want to be there with having to send out the news report about all of my patients' information getting leaked and put together a plan for to change. And I mean, that's not fun, right? It's talk about disruptive to your practice or practices. And unfortunately, it's quite often the norm in this industry. And you said it before. So I did a lecture last week to about 10 different dentists, and they were talking about how they all use the same OSHA HIPAA trainer who comes in, and frankly, we used to do an event called the Get It Done Day because it was so the worst 4 hours of my life was my OSHA HIPAA training every year. So I decided I wasn't going to do it anymore. So we had an event where I had speakers come in where we got all the regulatory training, and I just told everybody, just don't suck, make it somewhat fun and interesting, right? But that's the norm where people space out for a while, check the box, then go back and do the exact same thing. And I know you do things different. So, to the people that are listening, that are used to going and having this 2 hour, you know, I think of like the teacher from Peanuts, where it's like wah 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 wah, like, and you barely listen, but then you check the box for the year. What would you recommend, or how would you recommend that people do it different?
Well, that's why I created what I did. I started doing this in 2013 and just took a small subset of my clients that I was doing IT with just to see if it would work. And the results were amazing. So what I did was I essentially became their HIPAA officer, not in name, but I was outsourced as their expert to be on call at any given time for any little thing. And instead of focusing on just doing a class or just having certain paperwork or making my IT responsible for certain things, I looked at it from a 30,000-foot view. And then I dove down into the weeds and said, okay, so in each of these categories of people, process, and technology, what do we need? And how do I make this easy for the practice to understand, to implement, and to not screw up going forward? And out of that came what we're now calling our white glove fractional program. And we're doing that with OSHA and infection control as well, because those regulations are really tough. And when you have an emergency situation, people don't respond well. I mean, I lived in Northern California for 20 years. When we had those massive wildfires like LA is having right now, and we had those in
Oh,
2017, I fell into an open dishwasher because my husband thought that was a great time to unload the dishes. We don't respond well in true emergencies. So whether it's needle sticks or ransomware, or a patient says there's a privacy issue, or an employee takes a selfie when they shouldn't have with the day sheet behind them, and that's on Instagram every day for a year. I've had all kinds of stuff. But when you look at it from a 30,000-foot view, you can really figure out where the vulnerabilities are within a practice and focus on those. And if you're in the office and your job is office manager, you're covering reception, you're dealing with HR, sometimes you get stuck getting pulled into the back, assisting or hygiene or covering for someone that called in sick. You can't be an expert in all things. It's simply not going to happen anymore. And you need that phone a friend. And unfortunately, the options for dental are mostly DIY, some online DIY with some help, or you have consultants that are spread a little thin because they're doing OSHA and HIPAA. I don't do OSHA. I just want to make that clear. I have people on my team that do that. They're experts in their own right. I don't want to ever put a patient in danger. So I'm a firm believer. You stick to your lane, you know what you're doing, you become an expert in that, and you hire the right people to help you that are truly experts in it. And that's what they live and breathe.
so there's probably, everybody that doesn't work with you right now can probably benefit from your services. So I'd recommend, I mean, I just no, I really like what you're doing, and how you're doing it. So thanks for what you're
Thanks.
doing for practices and for patients. And I hope that, you know, I whatever I can do to help get, because this is a massive issue that I think people, basically what my last book is all about, that the people don't understand the severity of what we're talking about in the profession. And by people, I mean everyone, the software vendors, the dental practices, and certainly the patients don't, but they're about to. So, all of that being said, how can people get in contact with you, work with you, so that you can help elevate their security, their training, their readiness?
The website is probably the easiest. It's copperpennyconsulting.com. And you can send us a message. There's a lot of information on there. We even have a couple of free downloads for just kind of starting your journey. And really, I also do a ton of speaking. I'm out there, I'm doing webinars, I'm speaking at state level shows, at study clubs, all kinds of places. And I don't suck when I speak. I often present sparkly. I tell lots of stories of people doing dumb, preventable things and make it interesting so that you don't deal with the same stuff. So there's
Well,
lots of
that makes one of us. Sometimes it depends on the day. Sometimes I suck.
you're not
Sometimes
wearing sparkles.
yeah, no, no, I'm more of a just go right to the information. But I do love telling stories. Obviously, I think that's great. Well, I think you do a great job. So if you get the chance, check out Amy's lectures, webinars, and go to Copper Penny Consulting. We'll put a link around this presentation. Amy, so thanks so much for being on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.